Hi, Andrew Cuneo here with another Alchemy deck tech. This time it's going to be an updated version of the Temur ramp deck that I've made a video about before. It's updated with new cards from Kamigawa. I'm going to just go ahead and go over the whole deck again because this is not an archetype that you tend to play against very much if you're playing on the ladder, so people might not be familiar with it. So basically this deck is built around trying to maximize Settle the Wilds, which is a card from Alchemy. It lets you seek a basic land, and then you also seek a permanent with the mana value equal to the number of lands you control. So seek is not a mechanic where you get to choose. You get a random card from your deck that meets that condition. So you're not going to be able to select which basic land you get. You're just going to get one of the remaining basic lands from your deck at random. So you do need to have basic lands in your deck for this card to function. And even if it can't find a basic land, you still also get to seek a permanent with mana value equal to the number of lands you control. So my philosophy with this card is you want to, as much as possible, have a predictable thing you're going to get when you cast Settle the Wild. So one permanent at each mana value that you think you might be seeking for. So that's how I've constructed this deck. So the permanents that I'm seeking for are Bookwurm as an 8-drop. For a while I was not a fan of the Bookwurm, but my experience has been it's actually pretty good against black decks. A lot of the times the black decks, especially in Alchemy, will make you discard your expensive threat with City Stalker Connoisseur, and just having something that you can get back from your graveyard is a pretty big deal. 2 copies of Koma. I would say Koma is the primary way that this deck wins. You're mostly just trying to set up a situation where you ramp and play Koma. You hopefully get to use your Settle to ramp, and it helps you find the Koma if you don't have it already. 2 copies of a new card, Greater Tanuki. So this is a 6/5 trample for 6 mana, which obviously is not something you should be playing in Constructed in general. But this also has the channel ability of green and 2, discard from your hand, search for your library for a basic land, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So this is a little bit reminiscent of the adventure creature that would allow you to search out lands. It's not the most efficient thing in either one of its modes, but the flexibility helps it out a lot. Also, it's important to note with this channel ability, that can be done at instant speed, and it can't be countered with a card like Negate. They would need a Stifle style effect to stop that. So that's one of the new cards. It's good because it's flexible. Obviously, it's pretty bad on rate. One of the other cards I considered and tried for a little bit was Kairi, the Swirling Sky, which I think if you're looking for a 6-drop that you really just want to cast, this is probably the best option. Before this was printed, I would play with Tovolar's Huntmaster, and that was okay in some matchups, but it really wasn't anything special. I think Kairi's a little bit better than Tovolar's Huntmaster, but I also think that the deck just wants more consistent cheap ramping, which is why I have the Greater Tanuki. In the past, I used to play with Emergent Sequence, which was really not a very good card. In part because I think you need to play sweepers in this deck. So I've got 2 copies of Burn Down the House in the main deck, and using Emergent Sequence to ramp into Burn Down the House and then destroying your own land was a really bad combo. So here we're just playing with Burn Down the House. None of your lands will be destroyed by it anymore. And the Greater Tanuki does allow you to cast Burn Down the House on turn 4. If you go, ramp with the Tanuki into a turn 4 Burn Down the House. That's pretty good against an aggressive Werewolves deck. The 5-drop I'm using is just 1 Iymrith. I think it's the best 5-drop. There's some other, you could consider playing a card like Lear. I don't think it's as good as Iymrith, though. 4 copies of the Key to the Archive. I think this is the best 4-drop to settle for. You very consistently are going to have access to Key to the Archive on turn 4 because a lot of times you're going to play Settle on turn 3, and you'll be guaranteed to get a Key to the Archive. So this is all about setting it up so you ramp into Koma. There's also just the spells that you hit off of Key to the Archive are extremely good, so they're always going to be useful for you. There are some of them that are particularly good, and I'll get to those once we go through the rest of the deck. 3 copies of Brittle Blast, just as a 1-for-1 removal spell. You do need cards that can kill Townraiser Tyrant in this deck. In some ways, the ability of the Townraiser Tyrant that targets your lands is annoying, but it isn't quite as painful because you tend to just sort of ramp through it. So you're not going to wind up really missing a land once you decide that you don't want to pay the life for it anymore. Unlike some decks which are only making 1 land drop a turn, this deck can actually fight through the Townraiser Tyrant better. A couple Shatterskull Smashings as a double-faced card, so you're mostly going to play this as a land, but you are going to amass a tremendous amount of mana with this deck in the games where your deck functions, so having a way to convert that into value is what Shatterskull Smashing does for you. 4 copies of Expressive Iteration. I think this is just a great card, and I'm just happy to get to play it in any deck. This deck, obviously, once you've got your mana in play, this is probably the card you're hoping to draw the most every turn because it's going to just draw you into more great stuff. Another new card, Shigeki, Jukai Visionary. So this is another one of these interesting hybrid ramp/late game cards. This one, as a ramp spell, it's a little bit inconsistent because you do have to cast it, then it's got Summoning Sickness, then the next turn you can ramp with it. So it's a slow way to ramp, and it's a vulnerable way to ramp. But what do you get for it? Well, first of all, you get another 2-mana play, which having access to 2-mana plays is, I think, very, very important in Alchemy, and also in Standard, for that matter. So just having something you can add to the board on turn 2 is a very big deal. Also, you can ramp repeatedly with this if you need to. Not that that comes up that much. But really the biggest thing that this card gives you is it's a ramp spell that later on in the game just transforms into a tremendous card, given that you have access to tons of mana. So the channel ability, green, double X, channel and return X, target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. That is extremely powerful in a deck that's going to be making this much mana. And it's non-legendary cards, so you remember you can't get your Koma back, you can't get Iymrith back, you can't get other copies of Shigeki back, but what you can get back is all of your interaction. So you burn down the houses, Brittle Blasts, Abrades. You can get back the Greater Tanuki if you just need something to win the game. You can also get back the cards that you got off of Key to the Archive, which is huge. In particular, well, you can get Time Warp, which is always great to do repeatedly. But one really nice thing you can get is regrowth. So you can set up a loop where you're regrowing your Shigeki, and then you're channeling the Shigeki to get the regrowth and other stuff back. So this does allow you to assemble just a really, really strong late game. So against a black deck, against a blue deck, any deck that's not trying to just run you over, this is going to give you a late game trump, and it's coming attached to something that is also a reasonable early game blocker and a reasonable early game ramp spell. So I think this is a huge addition to the deck. Smoldering Eggs, it's another card that's just a good 2-mana play, especially in a deck that's planning to ramp, so Settle the Wild is going to be triggering it, Brittle Blast. Sadly, the Tanuki does not trigger it. Burn Down the House triggers it, but you're going to only want to be trying to trigger it with the 3/1/1 Devil's mode, because otherwise you'd be killing your egg. And then we've also got some Abrades and some Fading Hopes for some more cheap interaction. I wouldn't skimp on the Fading Hopes in this deck. This deck can sometimes come out a little bit slow, but it has such a strong late game that I think you can afford to give up a little bit of value in order to get the tempo boost from Fading Hope. Looking at the sideboard, the sideboard's another area where I think this color combination in particular shines, just because blue offers some really strong sideboard cards. Disdainful Strokes, Negates, Test for Talent, or Test of Talents. Those are all cards that, if you get to play them in the right matchup, are just completely incredible. So Disdainful Strokes, I mean, obviously 4 mana or greater spells. So if you're playing against a Magma Opus deck, if you're playing against a Dragon's deck, those would be the places where that would mostly apply. Negates are in the sideboard primarily if you're playing against one of those Wedding Anniversary Sanguine Brushstroke style decks, where Negate is going to be you know, a really good answer to a lot of their stuff. It also obviously works against Magma Opus decks. If you played against the Tezzeret deck, it would work there. Test of Talents is to kind of give you just a card that's great against the Magma Opus decks. I wouldn't go crazy boarding this in against the black decks, even though it is nice to be able to Test of Talents, go blank, or Rite of Oblivion. They have so many cards that can't be hit by the Test of Talents that I would probably stay away from that. Second copy of Iymrith. This is primarily against red-green werewolves, where you're going to want to have it as a great blocker, and you're probably going to want to make your curve a little bit cheaper. So you're against red-green werewolves, I would definitely board out one of the Komas, because they're just not going to be able to kill the first Koma. You don't need a second Koma in that matchup ever. Reckoner Bankbusters. This is another anti-blue, anti-black sideboard card. It's just a cheap play that's going to allow you to, you know, get some value and then eventually have a threat. I would say that this is probably, you'd be looking to swap this in for Smoldering Eggs in matchups where the Smoldering Egg is kind of fragile and it doesn't really block very much. Crush the Weak, another card against primarily Wedding Anniversary, Sanguine Brushstroke decks where they're going to have a lot of low toughness creatures and exiling them matters a lot. Another copy of Burn Down the House, which is really just primarily for red-green werewolves. Then we have a couple of alternate settle targets in case you want a different settle target in the matchup. So the Cragplate Baloth, you're really banking on the hexproof, can't be countered here. This would be in a matchup where your opponent is good at interacting with Koma. I don't know that there are a ton of decks right now that are actually good at interacting with Koma, so you may not even find that you need the Cragplate Baloths at all. But I've still been playing them. This one, though, it's going to depend on what kind of decks you want to make your deck good against. I would say you could definitely trim these from the sideboard if there's something else you really want to try. One copy of the Tarrasque, which is another one of these kind of weird cards that it's not, I wouldn't say it's really clear exactly what matchup you absolutely need this in, but I do think that there are matchups where it's nice, especially if you are concerned about killing something like a Leer. A lot of the times against Leer, the game is going to go pretty long, so you're going to get to the point where you can afford to cast this. And because in Alchemy, Leer does not allow people to cast spells from their graveyard on your turn, it's not just going to get divided by 0. At least not from the graveyard. So it is actually a fairly effective answer to Leer. So that's the deck. Let's see it in action. Alright, this is a reasonable hand for this deck. It's pretty important to think about what lands upon the first turn. So by playing the Stormcarved Coast that turn, if I drew a Abrade or Smoldering Egg for my turn, I would be able to cast it. The only card I wouldn't necessarily have been able to cast that turn that's a 2-mana card would be the Expressive Iteration, but I wasn't even going to want to play it really that turn. I am well supplied with keys to the archive. At this point, there isn't even a point to having it locked. There's so many copies of the key floating around. I'm going to take Day of Judgment there. Probably I'm going to just play Koma and it's going to be good enough to win the game. But in case something goes wrong, I could play Day of Judgment. My opponent's name is really Truth in Advertising. They are the Akum Hellhound Beatdown deck. Alright. This is a thing you can do. So I'm going to Fading Hope the Hellhound maybe they're going to play a haste creature here that I'd want a Fading Hope instead. It seems kind of unlikely. But I might as well let them continue to take game actions and just wait on the Fading Hope until I'm actually being attacked. Yeah. Sorry, opponent. You did all of that work for nothing. I guess I didn't talk about these lands in the deck tech, but there are copies of the green and the blue land in the deck. That's another addition. Not hugely impactful cards. Holy cow, I'm just being burned to death by Play with Fire. You get 5 more of those. I probably need to be a little careful that I don't take any damage from creatures for the rest of the game, just to make sure I don't get burned out. That should be pretty easy to do, though. Koma against a red-green deck, assuming the board is close to even, is pretty much game over. Also, we're going to be gaining some life here. It's time for the Bookworm. You can read all about it, opponent. So this game was a turn 5 Koma and a turn 6 Bookworm. It's pretty nice. What is this? This choose weapon card, could it have hit a flyer? Yeah, it doesn't. You can't target artifacts with choose weapon. That Hellhound really had a rough go of it this game. So I'm going to sideboard against this deck the same way I would sideboard against a red-green werewolves deck, I guess. Just to say I'm going to take out a Koma. I'm going to board in an Iymrith, and I'm going to board in a Burn Down the House. Probably for a Greater Tanuki. Just make my deck cheaper in general. Wait, why was I on the play? My opponent chose to be on the draw. Not a good decision. I think the egg can't block this thing. It's been a long time since I've seen this card in play. Opponent's got some stuff going on this game. All right. Do they have another 2-mana play to follow up? Shatterskull Smashing is not going to be good for their general board state, I'm sensing. And they didn't have a 2-mana play, they just wanted the damage. Alright. So now next turn I'm going to have a choice. I could play Settle before playing a land, and then I'm going to get a Greater Tanuki, or I could play a land, play Settle, and I'm going to get a Koma. If my only land that's available to me to play is Shatterskull Smashing, I might not even want to do that. I don't think I want to Fading Hope the Kazandu Mammoth. I think now I probably actually do just want to Fading Hope the Kazandu Mammoth. Should I just do it now in case of Snakeskin Vale? Probably. No reason I would need that land. I'm probably going to win if I draw an instant or sorcery. I don't seem to have any way to get rid of the Ashmouth Dragon. Otawara, you're not an instant or sorcery, Otawara. I'm disappointed in you. I could play the key, and I'd win off of Counterspell, Lightning Bolt, Claim the Firstborn. Don't have enough mana for Crescent Grip. Regrowth, Growth Spiral. Yeah, it's probably not worth trying to win this turn when Koma pretty much guarantees the win anyway. When I said I would win off of Counterspell, it's because I could have gotten up to 8 mana and played Shatterskull Smashing and then counterspelled it, and I would have triggered the Ashmouth Dragon twice. Which they have now killed the Ashmouth Dragon, not bad. Shatterskull Smashing is really one of my favorite cards. Lands that are also useful when you have a lot of other lands are just great. This hand is not the best, but it is a hand that is reasonably good at defending itself against an aggressive start, and against a slower start I am just going to, or against like a slower blue deck, I'm just going to want to make my land drops. This is probably a Hinata deck would be my guess. Definitely want to sequence my land so I have access to double green in case I want to play Settle if I draw it off the top of my deck. Might be a little bit soft to the Hinata combo game 1 with this deck. The Hinata combo being Hinata plus Magma Opus. Which it certainly seems like that is what my opponent is playing. Hopefully they just cast a Hinata here. And I can use the Greater Tanuki to ramp into Burn down the house. I actually realized I screwed up. I should have played the Rockfall Vale. The way I sequenced my lands, I wasn't going to be able to play Burn Down the House because my mountain was in my hand. That was a pretty big mistake. I'm guessing there's a fair amount of Divide by Zeros in my future. But we are playing with the nerfed version of Divide by Zero, so Divide by Zero on Koma isn't actually going to net them a lesson. So it's really not that bad to have to fight through. Ooh. It wasn't Divide by Zero, it was Fateful Absence. That's kind of ugly for me. It's time for dessert, the dessert of doom. Just going to use this Fading Hope. I don't think it's getting much better than that at this point. Even against a Magma Opus, I would just sweep the board with Burn Down the House. Discover the formula. I do not like the formula. It's time yet again for dessert. This may be the kind of matchup where I want to have Cragplate Baloth over Koma. Just because Cragplate Baloth will not die to Fateful Absence. As this game progresses, I have so many lands in play that I'm going to want to keep one land in my hand to discard the Key to the Archive, for certain. I'll probably play another land, and then after that I might not even continue to play lands. It'd be really nice if I would draw an Expressive Iteration or Shigeki. My graveyard isn't that juicy yet, but it'll get there. I'll go for the rebuy on dessert. So we've seen 2 of the cards that came from Discover the Formula thus far. Should maybe just make 1/1s. I've been holding on to this card with the idea that I would use it to kill Hanada and or Magma Opus. But we're perhaps past the point in the game where I need to do that, especially because I can do it with Shatterskull Smashing at this point. And now we've seen all of the cards from Discover the Formula. There is a certain amount of tension in that I want to get cards out of my hand to potentially draw multiple cards off of this Iymrith if it ever actually manages to connect. Am I getting double Magma Opus? Signs point to yes. The 2 4/4s I can deal with, and the 8 damage isn't that big of a deal. The 4 cards is a bigger deal for sure. Does dessert finally get to connect? Finally, we find out what was for dessert. It was an Otawara. Okay. It's not the best for me. Seems like I'm probably getting double Magma Opused again. It might do all the damage to the Iymrith, which I can save with Otawara. So they only have one Magma Opus left in their deck, which maybe gives me a tiny bit of hope. Come on, Time Warp. Regrowth isn't bad either. If they have Valorous Stance, they could save Hinata. I'll keep this land in my hand in case I draw another key next turn. That, I don't know if that literally kills me, but it's enough. Okay, this is a matchup where I definitely need my sideboard. Because once my Koma died that game, I didn't really have much going on. But you'll notice I have a lot of cards to bring in. You might want to have dessert more than once. I will board in the Tarask because I saw the Leer. Do I want these burn down the houses, or do I want to... I think I don't need burn down the house. Just rely on Brittle Blast to kill Hinata and Leer and potentially Magma Opus tokens. Obviously, my primary plan is going to be to try to counter the Magma Opuses. Also, I've got these two Shatterskull Smashings that could clean things up, or removal spells from Key to the Archive. So I really don't need to have a lot of removal in my deck. Maybe I'll go with 2 Brittle Blasts, 1 burn down the house, just to have a little bit of variety, and this way I won't get stuck with a ton of things in my hand that I can't cast as threats. I only have single green. Hopefully I draw an additional green mana this turn or next turn. Barring an additional green mana, obviously a Cragplate Baloth is always welcome in my hand. Maybe I should have played the Otawara last turn over the Boseiju, just so I could guarantee I'd be able to play Expressive Iteration. Thanks. That was not the land I was hoping to see. If they play Hinata and I don't draw a land, I am in a lot of trouble. Should I be patient? I think I should. Sometimes these decks play Unexpected Windfall. Actually, I'm just going to settle to get a Greater Tanuki. If they have a Magma Opus in their hand, it is going to be hard to win. I should maybe just gamble. It's kind of... I'm suspicious they have a Magma Opus because they did discard the first one. Can I win if they have a Magma Opus? I think I might be able to. Let's... try to fight through them potentially having a Magma Opus and just keep Disdainful Stroke up. I think I'm too far behind on tempo at this point. Goodbye, Greater Tanuki. Seems like that's probably a bait for casting a Magma Opus. So this should get me the Tarask. I'm still waiting for this Magma Opus. That's going to kill me. Even just Memory Deluge, find a Magma Opus kills me. They have enough mana to do that. This game's probably going to be a loss, but at least I got to cast the Tarrasque. You don't get to do that every day. Ward 10? You're not getting through Ward 10 with a Fading Hope. Come on, opponent. Ward 10. We still got Ward 10 going on. They're dead. I don't even need this, but they're just dead on board to the Tarrasque fighting. I cannot believe I won that game. Wow. See, that is why you should be subbed to this channel if you're not. You're not going to see things like that on other channels. Reasonable hand. Somewhat likely that this doesn't resolve on turn 3. That's okay. It doesn't really matter which of the Dreamroot Cascade and Stormcarved Coasts I play on that turn. All right, we haven't gotten to see this guy in action yet. Shigeki, get in there. You fight for our team now. I'm just going to go for channel with the Tanuki and activate the Shigeki. Just build up my mana more. There's a choice of which of these two to do first. I think that might have been the right choice. I don't know. It would be nice to have drawn a counter of some form by this point. Or to have milled some counters even would have been good. I think the worst card in my hand is Shatterskull Smashing right now. This is one of those games where I'm really just trying to represent that I have a counter to prevent my opponent from just starting to tap out and do their stuff, because I can't really stop it, obviously. They could Magma Opus me right now. I will get to kill everything if that happens, though. I think I want this to just resolve badly enough that I'm willing to use my Test of Talents there. 2 Hanadas and a Magma Opus. All right. I'm going to Demonic Tutor for Disdainful Stroke. So if they go Hinata Magma Opus, I'm going to, in response, float mana, channel the Shigeki, and use it to get back, burn down the house. One, two. So I can only afford to get one thing back with Shigeki if I want to cast Burn Down the House right now, which I think I do. It's good that I drew a spell that turn. I'm doing okay because I've still got these 2 cards on the Bank Buster. But I was in danger of them just kind of out-carding me. I probably should counter this Memory Deluge when they play it from their graveyard. So I also have a card coming to me from Iymrith. I don't know why they're doing this right now. But I'm just going to get to use the mana to crack the clue right away, which is nice. So I've got enough lands in play that this doesn't do anything. I guess there isn't even a basic left in my deck, so this is literally a card that has no effect on the game. This, on the other hand, is a card that has a tremendous effect on the game. I'm going to want to leave Negate up when I channel. So, 1. I can do it for 3 right now, or I can wait. I think I'm going to wait. Definitely want to stop that. Just getting Valorous Stance. Fateful Absenced. All right. So we have access to... I think I can untap this as well. Let's get black mana and untap it. Let's say I want to leave 2 mana up. I could get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards, or I could get 4 cards and leave up enough mana to cast 2 things. I think 4 mana and be able to cast 2 things is good. So we want a Baloth. We want Test of Talents. We want, I think, a Bank Buster. And a Disdainful Stroke. Wow. I thought I was so dead in the second game. Feels good to come back all the way and win. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That was a sweet match. And that really showed off some of the new cards. It showed off some of the cool Alchemy cards. That was a great match. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you do, please sub to the channel. And I'll see you next time.